Alrighty, Internet. Evan Benton of Dogg from Air here with the third of three book reports that I really wanted to get out there before we made it to Mexico, because most of my books are going to go into long-term storage and I'm not going to have access to them for a while. Today I'm looking at two works, I guess I would say, by Mr. Walter Bosley. And with my other two videos that you may have just watched this week, I didn't have the time to go and do my usual diligence with a full outline and everything, because we've been so busy moving to Mexico. So this one's, I'm going to do it from memory, and I hope I remember to get everything in that I wanted to talk about. So first of all is the series of books, Empire of the Wheel, and there's three of them. And then the other book is called Origin, the 19th Century Emergence of the 20th Century Breakaway Civilizations. So this book is more or less a prequel to the events in the other three. And the reason that I'm going to talk about this series is to connect it mainly to Dr. Joseph Farrell's work, The Reich of the Black Sun, which is one of the other two videos I made this week. And the idea of the breakaway civilization that he posits as originating out of the Third Reich during World War II, Walter Bosley is actually putting that emergence further back in history to the 19th century. Which sounds, I think if you're unfamiliar with the history, it sounds pretty fantastic, but if you consider it's only about 50 years or so, it becomes less so. So I'll start with Empire of the Wheel and these books. So what this is about is a series of murders that took place in 1915 in San Bernardino, California, and thereabouts. And what he's claiming or speculating is that this series of murders was actually a occult ritual to harvest energy for more or less the purposes of getting the United States into World War I at that time. And he links it also to, I believe, the sinking of the Lusitania, which occurred around that time period. The name Empire of the Wheel refers to Saint Catherine of the Wheel, and you can see she's on the cover of the third book in a stained glass depiction there. Saint Catherine, and it says that there is Sancta Caterina, otherwise known as Hecate, the demon Hecate. And so this is something that comes up with the saints. I think you have to worry about in the Catholic canon is that some of these saints might be basically demons, or at least just bad people masquerading as saints. So we have a common sort of etymology there, or just sounding names: Catherine, Hecate, Ekaterina. So I'm not gonna. You can look up what the symbolism of Catherine and Hecate is. But basically, Catherine was broken on the wheel, which means that during her martyrdom, she was tied to a wheel and beaten to death. Pretty atrocious. And well, I guess I should clarify what I just said too, because it could be that Hecate and the real Saint Catherine are separate, and then they've been conflated over time. And so certain influences might be posing as venerating Catherine and actually pose as venerating Hecate. So he's saying that these ritual murders were a sacrifice to this demon Hecate, and that they're doing this in order to gain favor with her and basically get the country into World War II. And so the reason that San Bernardino was chosen as the sacrifice place is because of some interesting points about its geography that he gets into. And so San Bernardino was the the terminus for the transcontinental railroad, if I'm getting that right, at any rate was a terminus for one of the first major railroads coming across the United States. So it was a huge place for that, and that's why it was sort of a boomtown in those days in the early 20th century. And what he's saying is that there's some sort of an energetic nexus there in San Bernardino, and that they were tying into that. And as far as the breakaway civilization, that's where it really gets interesting, because he's saying that this geographical nexus is linked to basically gravity, alterations or perturbations in the gravitational field of the Earth that can be measured at that point. And furthermore, he's saying that the railroads prior to this, where they were placed on the United States, actually coincide with these perturbations in gravity that you might know as ley lines. And he mentions a book, Handprints of Atlas by Sechery, which was out of print for a long time and just came back into print. I ordered it. It got shipped to New Orleans, and New Orleans Postal Service shipped it out to, I think, Kentucky. So I hope that gets back to me before I leave and I can read it. But at any rate, what they were doing, he's saying, with the whole railroad and other things like he gets into Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which I don't know too much about, but it's pretty interesting. He's saying that the railroads and various outlaws and other groups were more or less scouting out the terrain to find these ley lines, these geographical perturbations. And the reason that they're mainly doing this, in addition to the energy harvest aspect of it, was, well, let's see. Okay, I didn't quite touch on the fantastic technology of Reich of the Black Sun for deliberate purposes, because I wanted to just talk about how the main facts around the story don't really pan out when you examine them closely, because that at least is the less speculative aspects of it, the more, kind of like things you can really, wrap your mind around pretty easily without getting crazy. But one of the big technologies here was an anti-gravity technology. And what Bosley is saying is that anti-gravity technology actually existed to a lesser extent, not just in the 19 teens, but back in the 19th century as well. So, and I'll get out the origin here. So on the cover, he makes that connection pretty clear. Here we got a UFO, flying saucer in the space age, and here we got, what the heck even is that? Something that looks like, an elaborate hot air balloon type of a deal. So, and he gets into those, if I can, here we go. So here's some more of those pictures, right? Pretty elaborate, hard to make head or tail out of. There's another page of them. And these were drawn apparently by a guy named Charles Dellschau. And the time period for him escapes me right off the top of my head. But Dellschau was a kind of a goofy guy who was associated with these strange goings-on there in Southern California. And he drew a whole book full of these strange pictures, and they were found much later in the second half of the 20th century by some guy just almost about to throw them out in a art store or an antique store or something like that. I can't remember. But what Bosley's saying, and if you look at him, you can Google him. It's Dellschau. I believe you can find it on Amazon too. But what he's saying is that these are primitive flying machines that he's describing. And there's a few interviews or talks by Bosley where he's talking about these flying machines specifically, and a group that he believes he's identified, which he calls NIMSA, NYMZA, and it's a group that was active in Southern California during this time period, of basically super rich fellows of German provenance developing these wacky flying machines. And so Bosley's theory basically as it stands with this technology, which I found very, very fascinating and reasonable, is that what we're seeing with these rickety designs is we're seeing an early version of what came to be the sleek flying saucers of the mid-20th century. So the reason then that they were so interested in mapping out these gravitational anomalies is that the anti-gravity technology that they had at this time was not capable of fully counteracting the Earth's gravity. And so they had to find these like rivers of lower gravity, and then they could use those and fly around the continent. And possibly they actually used the railroads, not primarily to traffic goods and people, but to just serve as a visual identifier for the pilots of these craft. And so there's a crazy thing that I can't believe I've never heard of, but you can check it out on Wikipedia. Google it on the Wikipedia. This is the 1897 Airship Mystery. So go ahead and do that and report back to me. Basically, just like 50 years later, in 1947, there were sightings of airships all around the continent of North America. And unlike the Roswell, etc., though, there were actually reports of people being taken up into these ships. They would hear bands playing from them, and they would land, and someone would take them on a joyride, basically, for an hour or so, and put them back down. So there's no extraterrestrial angle to these sightings that I'm aware of. But just the sheer fact that they're around, and I mean they're in newspapers all over the country from this time period, super interesting. Now, beyond that, there are reports too that some examples of this technology were actually demonstrated for President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, and that's just wacky. But at this point, who am I to say? But for the sake of reference, that takes our time period for our breakaway civilization from the 1940s, possibly 30s, and puts it back to at least the 1890s, if not the 1860s. And so, once again, the breakaway civilization we're saying is Joseph Farrell is tracing it to the Schutzstaffel / Schwarze Sonne, if you're in the inner circle, and then the Ahnenerbe within them, and then they're the ones who are someone between, even within the Ahnenerbe was continuing this kind of research and shepherding it past the end of World War II into the Cold War and into the current era. Well, so Bosley is taking that, and with the Germans in North America, he's positing this group called NIMZA, which was involved in that same research and secret research. What we today call black budget research, what then we might have called occult research, and using it for different means, for both just locomotion, getting from point A to point B, but also trying to harvest energy to influence to remotely influence events, world history, such as world wars and things like that. So, but the 50-year kind of thing is also notable, as he describes the Hecate connection, because apparently there's a connection between Hecate and 50 and 100-year cycles, at least according to Bosley. So that would be 50 years between 1897 and 1947, and then also there's a 50-year window between the 1915 murders and the Summer of Sam murders, the Zodiac murders in San Francisco, which I believe are 1965, but maybe not quite. I don't think you have to be right on the money for that symbolism, you know. So, but there's plenty of speculation too that those, you know, murders were not the work of a lone gunman, but of some sort of like an occult cell, right? And I mean, personally, that's my sort of, having read a lot of this stuff, that's sort of my speculation that these types of murders happen quite a bit, you know, quite more often than we're led to believe, you know, and they're pinned on a, you know, crazy guy, lone gunman. So you know, Jack the Ripper kinds of things, and like up to and including you know, cattle mutilation, where they're collecting specific body parts for use in rituals. So, and then, you know, further, the 100-year cycle. When did you write these books? 100 years after 1915, of course, is 2015. Yeah, so he wrote this in 2011, thinking that something might happen in 2015, and I mean, we might have missed it, but it might be that the whole, you know, the current event that we're not allowed to talk about on YouTube is, you know, related to that. You know, it's a very interesting possibility. But so that's about it for old Walter Bosley. The works aren't, you know, as to you know, the works themselves, they're not as I hesitate to say, but not as quite as rigorous as Joseph Farrell's. So they're easier to get to, I guess, easier to get through. And my wife made it through the first one, and she enjoyed it. She struggles with reading books, but as you can see by the bookmark, she made it almost all the way through. So that's a compliment to Mr. Bosley. And you know, he does tend to speculate, but he's very clear when he does speculate. So that's, you know, no harm there. And more or less writes like a detective novel, or like a detective novelist, which makes sense because apparently he was a detective earlier in his career. So they're fun to read, is what I'm trying to say. And let's just look at the covers again, just so you get the idea, because there's a lot more in this kind of stuff that I'm not going to talk about. But so, right, origin, the 19th century stuff. We got the flying saucer, and then the Charles Dellschau depiction of what may be a primitive flying saucer. And then we got, for book 1, I believe that's Hecate. You can't read that stuff, but it's different occult holidays, you know, Beltane, Midsummer, Samhain, whatever. And then that is Mr. Crowley. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So gets into him as well. And this book is dedicated to Harry Houdini. So that's another interesting connection. But now this, book 2 then, we got creepy statue, Airship brand, you know. My parents used to have a bunch of these framed back when they had really cool, you know, labels for produce boxes and things like that. My parents used to have a bunch of those framed, and that's what that is there, looks like. And then I think that's Prussia. That's the Prussian seal. And then down here, this must be San Bernardino, California. And then, again, we got Hecate, or St. Catherine, with her wheel as her iconography. Oh, and who's that? Old H.P. Lovecraft. Sorry, I'm just thinking about what his cat's name is, and it's making me laugh. But yeah, so there's a lot to go into in this, a lot more connections that I'm not really talking about, and I'm just trying to gloss over the big picture thing. So I hope I did a good did a good idea of enticing you into reading these. And again, I'm bringing them up before I get them into storage, including Joseph Farrell's books, and including Anatoly Fomenko's books, which I've already got in storage, or at least taped up, because I want to start talking about the idea of the breakaway civilization and what that entails for humanity. And of course, my focus is on biology and germ warfare in particular, so we're going to get into that in some videos to come, and I hope you'll stick around for those. I hope you'll support my channel, because, you know, I paid out of pocket for these, and I haven't, anyway. if you'd like me to buy more books and read them, or if you'd like to send me some books and read them, get in contact with me, and we can make that happen. But leave some comments down below if you have any questions or comments. Subscribe to my channel. Please subscribe to me on Rumble as well. It's just rumble.com/evdogfromair, because we can all see where this train is headed. And but share this video definitely if you found it on YouTube or Rumble. I guess I'd say I prefer to share it from Rumble. Tell your friends. And as always, this is Evan Benton and Evdogfromair. And have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.